All right, well, now that the software is loaded, one of the things that I want to do now is begin to bring the software in and then check the data to make sure that everything is connected correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to restore a backup file, and then we're going to test those connections. You've already installed PGAdmin in another video, and we went through a little bit on how to get things set up. But let's start now with our data. So you can see I have Postgres, a lot of different versions because I teach different versions and I work in different areas. So we're going to focus on this Postgres 11. So if I expand this, you can see we have different databases under Postgres 11. And looking at those, let me just close some of these off real quickly. You can see I have one called Big Data, one called Postgres, and one called Training. What I'm going to do is create a new database. So I'm going to right-click on Databases and say Select or Create, and then Database. And the database is going to be called Tompkins, because this is Tompkins County. It's the training we're going to be going through. I click on Save, and now I have a database. If I open up Tompkins, you can see I can go to the different schemas and under public, and right now I have a database with nothing in it. In fact, there's no tables. And the other thing I want to show you are functions. So you'll see here there are no functions listed. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create some functions or import functions for PostGIS. So now that I'm selected the tables, I'm going to go to Tools and click on Query Tool. And this is going to allow me to issue an SQL statement. So I'm going to say create extension PostGIS. This doesn't even have to be uppercase. I just did it this way. And when I run that, you'll see it returns successfully. And let me refresh this. I'm going to right click and say refresh. And now when I go to functions, a whole bunch of functions are going to open up. And if we scroll through, you'll see we've got a number of different commands. Let's go through here. ST within ST Veroni. So that's making Veroni diagrams. So there are a number of different functions that are now GIS type functions. Here's one that says map algebra. That's part of it. There's ones for thinking like let's see, here's, scroll down a little bit. Here's ST buffer. So you see there's a buffer command, or a number of buffer commands creating centroids. So this means we have the actual GIS commands that are part of the SQL language now. Okay, let's go back up. We can close up our functions. I just wanted to show you that we now have functions available. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to load the data. Right now we have an empty database called Tompkins that has spatial functions ready for us. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say restore. So what Postgres is going to be looking for now is a file or a backup file that I've created that has all of our data. So if I click on file name and I'm going to go to C Training Tompkins Postgres, and then I'm going to type in Tompkins and select a backup file. And just to show you, here is where that Tompkins file actually is located in C Training Tompkins Postgres. One of the things that I had to do is hit the refresh button. So now we see Tompkins.backup. So C Training Tompkins Postgres, Tompkins.backup. I'm going to select that file, and then I'm going to say restore. So this is going to take a minute. You can see it's beginning to run the backup process. And I'm going to just shut this down for a moment, and we'll be back when it's completed. Okay, I'm back. I could have left the video running. It only took 16 seconds to bring that file in. There's about 70 megabytes worth of data. Now if I come into Tompkins, and let's close up our functions again, and we can move down to tables. Now you can see we have a whole bunch of tables that are listed. And one of the things we can do is I can click on the fire stations. And if we look here, Under our fire stations, we have column names. These are the different column names. And we have indexes. There's only going to be a spatial index at the moment. And one of the things I'm going to do first is I'm going to right-click on fire stations, and I'm going to say View and Edit Data. And let's view all the rows. So we'll select all the rows, and it's creating the query. So these are all the rows for the fire stations. So we said select star from public.fire stations. We could also just say select star from fire stations. So if I come back to the query tab, I can come in here and say select star from fire stations and run that. And that's completed. So at the moment, I'm feeling pretty good about the fact that we have data now in our database. And if you look in this table, you can see we have this thing that looks like a little eyeball. We can actually view the geometries geographically. And here you can see the different points come up, and we'll be able to select all the different points as well. Now in this case, the data for the fire stations, come back in here again, is in a planar coordinate system. We could actually change this, and I can say select geometry from fire stations if we just want to look at the geometries. Geom rather, excuse me. And we can click that open, and you can see it's a blank background. I'm going to just make a quick change just to show you the data right now is in a planar coordinate system. We're going to move it into a latitude and longitude coordinate system. And that's going to be the transform command. And we'll take the geometry and we're going to transform it into 4326, which is latitude and longitude. Get familiar with this one because we're going to use it a lot. So that's done. I just brought in the, let's call it geom as geom. And then I can say star too. Let's bring everybody in. There we go. So if I click on this geom, you'll see now that OpenStreetMap comes in the background. So I can now zoom to the actual locations. This is something new in PGAdmin 4 that wasn't in some of the other classes I taught because PGAdmin 3 did not include this. So now I can click on an actual fire station and get information about it. So we're going to be able to look at our data through PGAdmin 4, which is really nice, but we're also going to look at it through QGIS. Now, if you've installed QGIS and you come into C Training Tompkins Postgres, I have already set up your application. So we'll go to QGIS 3.6. So if you double click on this PG_QGS, QGIS is going to open up and it's going to be connected to our Postgres database. And this just came up. So now what you'll see are some of the flood zones. I can turn those off. You can see the fire stations again and the watersheds. And then I can zoom in to the actual parcels. Now, these are not a shapefile, they're not a geodatabase. These are actually layers or tables inside a database. So if I hover over this, you can see the database name is Tompkins. It's using the local host, and the port is 5433 that we have set up. And if I come in here, I can click on the buildings and slide them up, and now you can see the buildings are in here as well. And the other thing that we can do is we can click on an individual property and get information about it. So these are some of the attributes of that table. So this is working just like a GIS normally would, except it's now talking to Postgres and receiving the data from there. The last thing I want to do is actually for our project set up a connection to the database from inside of Postgres. Right now, Postgres is looking at the database because I set the project up that way, but I want us to now create a new connection. So we're going to say add layer and add PostGIS layer. You can also use Control-Shift-D. So I've got a number of different ones that are in here, and I'm going to create one. Let's create a new one, and I'll call it Tompkins 2. Now I have one that's called Tompkins already. So I'm going to want you to create one that's called Tompkins. I'm calling mine Tompkins 2. The host is 127.0.0.1. That's the IP address. The database is Tompkins. And under the basic configuration, the username is Postgres, POSTGRES, password POSTGRES. I'm going to store it so we don't have to keep being asked about it. We'll test the connection. It was successful. And then I'm going to say, OK. So that's done. Now I can hit connect. And you can see I can click on public. And here are all my data sources. So again, these are those watersheds. Here are the fire stations. We can move these over, and you can see we have the SRID, or the coordinate system, in each of these as well. So one of the things that I can do is come in here and grab these TC soils. Actually, let's turn these off. And if I hit TC soils, I can then add that to the map. And you can see that's added. I'm going to click off of here, but here are the TC soils. Let's turn off the buildings. And we can zoom, right-click, and zoom to the layer. So this is our soil map. And again, it's being read outside or from Postgres. And here we are inside of Postgres again. And you can see here is TC soils as a map, or as a table with the data that's already inside it. So at this point, our connections should be good. So let's jump into the next section and get started.